Welcome everybody under the directorship of Mr. Derek Buchler here. I'm guided to get the discussion underway. Hopefully other invited guests who have confirmed that they'll be coming around, they're certainly making their way through. Welcome, welcome everybody. My name is Ernest Pillay. I'm an anchor, presenter on SAFM, SAFM's Afternoon Drive show. In fact, my involvement here this evening, or at least my invitation, is as a result of a discussion, I would like to call it, not an interview, but a conversation I had with Derek sometime last week in a promotion of the Mzala Nxumalo commemoration, or week as it were. And I'm told, because we rely on those on the other side within our earshot to listen to what we speak about every day, that through that discussion, Derek felt that indeed I should be here to assist, or at least facilitate in this discussion that we hope will be fruitful, few as we are. So it's going to be robust and of course attending to some of the pertinent questions that are being raised specifically by the youth. Now, this concept emanates from a discussion that was had with the Mzala Nxumalo Center and young students. Now, we all know young people are very forthright and outspoken about how they view the world and how they feel about certain things. They came out very strongly criticizing institutions that had been founded to honor the memory of struggle icons, struggle heroes, but failed to see their purpose. They're asking pertinent questions as to why the existence of these plethora of foundations that we all know that are represented here tonight as well. They are at pains, to put it bluntly, as to what their role and their relevance is in today's South Africa from a youth perspective. So the critique is founded on that idea that those who are being honored were actually involved in the day-to-day struggles of the day back then of the people, and were on the front lines of resistance, you know, those who fought against apartheid and so on and so forth. And so the students felt that this was a contradiction if you mirror it with today's society, and that these institutions, according to them, are being activists from a distance, you know, from the comforts of their armchairs and silos, that further gives impetus as to how they feel. There's a disconnect with the existence of the foundations today. And I guess it's the duty of all of us gathered here today and those representing the various foundations to try and deconscientize, I suppose, for want of a better word, the youth to see the meaningful role, as we will hear from the various representatives from the different foundations as well. So that's really the overarching theme of our discussion this evening. And as I said, I hope, few as we are, it will be robust and engaging. So I will call upon Mr. Derek Buchler. For those who don't know him, is the CEO of the Mzala Nxumalo Center, COO rather, of the Mzala Nxumalo Center, to give us a synopsis of the theme, as I've kind of alluded to it, and conceptual framing, of course. And then we'll give each foundation about 10 to 15 minutes to talk to their particular institution, their vision, mission, and work in relation to the person after whom the foundation is founded, of course. And then we'll engage, in fact, we'll hear from the CEO of the Mzala Nxumalo Center, Mr. Jabulanis Tole, to give us his thoughts as well. And then we'll take the discussion further, you know, Q&As, and engage and get different thoughts from the room as well. So that's really how the discussion will unfold and proceed. So let me hand over to Mr. Derek Buchler, COO of the Mzala Nxumalo Center, to give us a synopsis and a welcome.
Thank you, Ernest. As he said, I'm Derek. Before I start, I'd just like to welcome, firstly, Mrs. Nxumalo, Mzala's wife and his daughter, Balindelwe, and also to welcome Mrs. Sanele Mbeki. We're pleased you could join us this evening, and to everyone here. Ernest has really put it in a nutshell as to how this evening came about. It forms part of a whole week of celebrations which we call the Mzala Nxumalo Commemoration Week. We normally have this week in February, and it's normally in the week of his passing, which is the 22nd of February. But this year we postponed it for June. We have two events now biannually. One is we have an Imbumba Fiesta in February and one on Youth Day, which is Saturday. And so we tied up this week to that event. We had an event in Durban on Monday with Omar Bacha, Raf Smayet and Cedric Nunn, three eminent photographers and activists. And the discussion, the dialogue was around the art of activism. And we had each of them talk to their specific drive around the photography they took and what their role as activists vis-a-vis being artists was. That was a very well-attended event. Tuesday we had the launch of a book about Comrade Jabo Ndlovu in the Manae Hall in Mbali, Pietermaritzburg. Manae Hall is, of course, the last time Nelson Mandela gave a speech before being captured in Howick. It's also close to her home where she was assassinated along with her husband and one daughter during the war there. And it was apt that we launched the book there in collaboration with SWAP, who is at Wits University and Jacana Press. And so we had people from trade union NUMSA and also some who were with Mawu at the time, her daughter, and that was also a remarkable event. It's part of the Hidden Voices project, so there are the projects around reprinting books that perhaps were printed, like the one by Jabo Ndlovu. So it was republished and they've launched it again. And there's a whole series of books that are going to be published about various activists. And then, of course, tonight, when I met Ernest yesterday, he said Johannesburgers are spoilt for choice. Because I asked him, what he thought the turnout would be. But nonetheless, we're here, and I think it's a very pertinent topic. At least we will have it recorded, and that will go onto our YouTube page, so it will be available. And yeah, next event we'll probably have to look at a different marketing strategy. But nonetheless, here we are. One thing that became pertinent throughout this week, and I think I just want to note it now for tonight's discussion, is that on each of the different nights, several themes emerged. And one of them was the youth, one of them was anger, the other one was a state of fear, and oddly enough, and not surprisingly, the culture of reading. And that was a very, very interesting thing. All the comrades on the different nights were referring to that basically what Mzala and many other revolutionaries have always spoken about, is that there's no revolution without ideas. And that comes from a very deep introspection with literature and engagement with texts. And that came out very strongly in those debates. Tonight we really want to focus on foundations, as Ernest has already alluded to, and the disconnect. And I think Ernest provided that little theoretical tool last night in our discussion, and I think it's a possibly something to take forward in a more formal setting. The disconnect that we probably are seeing again, as in 76, and then with fees must fall, roads must fall, the disconnect between what young people see as necessary in order to bring about change and what and now all of us, an older generation who're probably too tired to go and toy anymore. So it's this disconnect that we're looking at. And I hope that tonight we will have a meaningful discussion around this. Incidentally, at the Mbumba Fiesta on Saturday, we're going to be having a library tent. So it was very interesting that this theme of reading came through. So yeah, I just thought I'd mention that. I'm going to hand back to you, Ernest, and thank you and welcome.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you, Derek. And something just to plant the seed to emphasize what Derek has touched on. I mean, some of the things, as I read through in preparation for this discussion, is exactly that. I mean, the young people are questioning where these foundations, for instance, when Roads Must Fall, the campaign got underway, the very famous, or maybe I should say infamous, Fees Must Fall. They are questioning where the foundations were, whether in solidarity, in marching, you know, on the streets with them, or as a voice of support. I don't know. Are their expectations unfounded? I don't know. And those are some of the probing questions we need to delve deeper into as the discussions unfold. So I think round about this time, guided by my agenda here, I take it we have the different foundations here as well. So I will hand over to the foundations to give us the background, their vision, and in part also try to explain the existence of these foundations. So Derek, I'll be guided by you as well with the different foundations present.
I forgot to actually welcome you. Starting next to Ernest is Vern Harris from the Nelson Mandela Foundation, who's representing the CEO who was unable to make it. Next to him, we have Mr. Ntunzi Lutuli from the Lutuli Foundation. Next to him is Mr. Nishan Bolton from the Ahmed Kasrada Foundation. And I've gone blank now. Yes, Douglas Irvin from the Dennis Hurley Center, which is in Durban, but he is here in Johannesburg. So, and then we have Mrs. Linda Villikatsi from the Oliver and Adelaide Tambo Foundation. And then our CEO over there on the end who will come in, Mr. Jabulani Sitole. So I think we would possibly start, Vern, if you'd like to fire the first salvo.
Yeah, thank you. Can people hear me? Yes. Good evening, everybody. Sanbonani. Let me start with a very short story. I think we've got 10 minutes each, right? In terms of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, I think the critical thing in terms of the original conception was that when Madiba stepped down as president in 1999, he assumed that there would be some structure to support his continuing work, and very quickly realized that that structure was not there. And so without too much thought, the Nelson Mandela Foundation Trust was set up essentially to become his post-presidential office. And from 1999 until 2004, the foundation did pretty much whatever Madiba was passionate about, from peacemaking in other countries to building schools, building clinics, a lot of HIV/AIDS work. There was no real coherence to the work of the foundation except in the person of Madiba. You might remember in 2004 he called a press conference where he said it was time for him now to retire from retirement. Don't call me, I'll call you. And what he conveyed to us at that time was that he wanted to step away from public life, and he didn't want to be involved in fundraising. He didn't want to decide on the agenda for the organization anymore. Now, of course, it took him 6 years to finally step away from public life, but we went into a process of consultation with what we called key stakeholders. Now, we had many conversations with him in that process between 2004 and 2006. And one of the options on the table was to simply close the organization down. We were his post-presidential office. He was stepping away from public life, so maybe we just close it down. Out of those consultations came a decision which he then authorized and signed off on. It became a completely revised mandate, an amendment to our trust deed, which was to say that the foundation's purpose is to promote social justice through memory and dialogue work. Now, before we began to implement that mandate, what we did, and I think this is what I'm offering to this discussion in terms of the Nelson Mandela Foundation holding up a mirror to itself. How successful have we been, and is the amount of money that we spend worthwhile? What we did was to do a benchmarking exercise in 2006 where we looked at 75 organizations around the world founded in the name of an individual with a strong legacy mandate. We then focused on 8 of them and visited each one and interviewed people working in them. And what we were looking for was the key lessons so that we don't make the same mistakes that what we're calling this evening foundations so often make. I mean, in South Africa, the last audit that we did, which was I think 3 years ago, we identified just under 60, I think 57, 58 organizations founded in the name of struggle veterans. So it's in our country, it's one comrade, one foundation. And we compete with one another for resources, and our mandates overlap, and it can be frustrating for people who watch what we do. So let me quickly wrap up by giving you, and I've pulled out a report from 2006. What were the key lessons that we learned from that study? So 9 lessons. The first one was successful promotion of a legacy hinges not on use of a name, but on purposeful action having impact in society. And that's a question we have to be asking ourselves this year in the centenary of Madiba's birth. Are we actually making a difference in the world, or do we just use his name? Second one, mandates sustainable over time tend to be purpose-centered rather than person-centered. And that's a question we have to be asking because we still focus unrelentingly on Madiba as an individual. And after Mamwini died, I think the critique was strong, and we heard it, and we are still holding up that mirror. A third one is a sustainability plan not dependent on involvement by the institutional founder is essential. In other words, you can't rely on that individual. We did. He did fundraising for us. In 2004, when he held that press conference, we realized we don't have a sustainability model. Madiba makes phone calls, and then we have funding for the next year. And you can't sustain yourselves as an organization on that basis. The fourth one, memory work is difficult to sustain without endowment or state support. At the same time, state support for memory work with a social justice dimension is problematic. And so far, we've, by and large, avoided relying on state funding. And we feel that that's critical moving forward. We have received certain funding from national lotteries for the refurbishment of our building and so on, but most of our funding doesn't come from the state. I'm nearly done. Then blurring of boundaries between institutional spaces and those of the founder's family invites complexity and incurs many risks. Now, of course, with Madiba's family, we're talking about 3 families, and it is still a question for us today in terms of how do we work with all branches of that family, and how do we make sure that we don't step on one another's toes. And then absolute clarity must be secured in relation to ownership of the founder's memory resources and broader intellectual property. And in our case, Madiba did sign deeds of donation, and he signed off on trademark registrations and so on. But still, to be frank, there are areas of contestation with family and other stakeholders. Liaison and joint endeavor with sister and other stakeholder institutions is desirable, but the institution's mandate must be distinctive. So we have to work closely with the governing party. We have to work closely with the state on numerous projects. We have sister organizations. Madiba founded other organizations. We need to be working cooperatively rather than competitively. I'm nearly done. Second last one. Beneficiary categories and target audiences must be clearly defined. Who are you serving? Who are your constituencies? Who are you doing the work for? And then lastly, good governance is absolutely critical for credibility. And that's something we have to constantly critique ourselves on. And I would argue all foundations need to do that. So those are the measures that we set for ourselves back in 2006. And I think we've done well in certain areas, but we've made bad mistakes, and we're not doing well in some of these areas. And I'm not going to defend us. I'm just saying this is where we are, and I look forward to engaging with colleagues here and with people in the audience. Thank you.
All right, yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for the round of applause. So we'll move right along and hand over rather to the Luthuli Foundation.
Our foundation, the Chief Albert Luthuli Foundation, was founded in 2008. I always say that we had a very unique problem, unlike many of the other foundations that have been formed, like the Nelson Mandela Foundation, the Ahmed Kathrada, the Oliver Tambo Foundation, in that Chief Luthuli died in 1967. He was murdered in 1967. And so in 1994, at the dawn of the new democracy, his memory had really been wiped out of most of people's minds. So our first task was to first try and resurrect him in people's minds. That wasn't the case, for instance, with Nelson Mandela. Everybody knew who he was alive. So we had some very, very unique and quite difficult challenges that we had to get over. So we spent quite a bit of time with that. We also work with the Luthuli Museum, which is based in Groudville, where Chief Luthuli, in fact, it's his home, which was converted to a museum. It's a National Heritage Site. So it was important to do that, but the whole objective was to, and that's the objective of the museum, of the foundation. It is to preserve his legacy and take aspects of his life, particularly around his leadership skills and his passion for education, and play that role in society, in shaping society, and design programs that will promote responsible and ethical leadership in our society. That's the first one. And the second one is to ensure that everybody in this country is properly and well educated. That's really the objectives of our foundation. Now, have we been successful? We certainly have not been as successful as we hoped at the beginning. And one of the biggest challenges that we have had is a funding problem. Now, Van said here that, with Nelson Mandela it was easy. He would simply just make phone calls and the money would come pouring in. We didn't have that advantage. And so we have to find other ways of working. And so that has limited our rate of progress in the programs that we want to do. But we have achieved certain things. For instance, we formed a leadership center which is called the Chief Albert Luthuli Center for Responsible Leadership with the University of Pretoria. And there are great things that we do there in terms of promoting responsible leadership, both in South Africa and around the continent. And there are a few other things that we have managed to do. There are also programs that we work with, that we get engaged in with the Luthuli Museum and other institutions. But yeah, there is a lot more that we are still going to do. But, I always say for us, instead of starting at the start line, we actually started at minus 50 meters if you're running a 100-meter race. I think I will end it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I think we'll just keep rolling. Yeah, thank you for the round of applause. It helps as well in keeping us warm. So we'll hear now from the Kathrada Foundation.
Good evening to everybody. It can only be those who are left or center of left who can try to pull off an event to compete with the World Cup. Of all nights, tonight we are sitting here when the rest of the world is watching soccer. But I think also because it's the last day of the fast, it has impacted on this as well for a lot of people who might have been here. The provocation I thought was quite useful. But I'm not sure who these young people are and how many they were and where exactly they come from. Because I'd like to understand their own activism as well in relation to the questions that they're putting to the foundation. I can speak for the Kathrada Foundation that the attempt to work with young people has been at the core of the work of this foundation. We're now moving to the 10th anniversary of this foundation in August of this year. When we started, it firstly took about 2 or 3 years to persuade Ahmed Kathrada that a foundation would be of benefit. He was of the view that he wasn't important enough for a foundation to be set up in his name. He was only persuaded when we went to him and said, look, we now have promises for a piece of land on which we can actually build a museum to house all of the archival work that we want to do. And that's what persuaded him. We still don't have the land, but that's another story. We spent at least about a year or two, and Ven was part of those discussions, grappling with what exactly do we do? And we started off as an archival project, really collecting all of the material on Kathy, putting together the catalogs. But as the discussions progressed, we then became aware that his own life had important lessons and values that had relevance to contemporary South Africa. And that fundamentally was the notion that the value, the principle, the tactic of moving towards or working for a non-racial South Africa was important to him and is important now. And around that, we developed the tagline of the foundation, Deepening Non-Racialism. Programmatically, up until his death, at least 60% of our time was dedicated to supporting his work or his own program, which essentially involved at least 6 months before his death was about close to 300 public engagements a year for the last 3 to 4 years. And that just took an enormous amount of time. But when we do an analysis of that, at least 60% of that was engaging with young people across the country, including a symbolic and quite an important symbolic presence at Wits University in particular during the protests and at union buildings. In fact, that was the first time that he smelled tear gas and was almost got involved with the water cannons that were used on the day. So that kind of direct symbolism was there. And as and when it was required, he would have been engaging with young people. So if I look at just the last 2 weeks of the work of the foundation, last week we were in Annandale bearing a young leader of our youth work, our youth programs, whose father had accidentally shot him. But in that community, a youth group of the foundation was in the process of being set up. A few days ago, we took a huge group of young people to Nasrec to be part of the programs there of the provincial government. This morning, we did a June 16 program at UNISA, again, just focusing on youth and their issues. The last weekend of June will see almost 300 young people going to the streets of Lenasia South, doing relief work, but in the process of that relief work, refining their understandings of issue of poverty and hunger and destitution, and in some way learning the art of doing basic youth activism work in relation to a particular problem. These young people now form the nucleus of youth clubs that the foundation will be setting up at least in 10 localities in Gauteng in the course of this year to pilot a new direction. Foundations by their nature are not mass movements, they don't have mass structures, they account to their boards. This is a whole new direction to begin to connect more firmly with a support base. We culminate a lot of our youth work annually with a youth camp on Robben Island, and that we will do again in November, December of this year, where 60 young people will go through an intensive leadership program on the island over 5 days. Our young people have been at the forefront of writing about anti-racism work. Last year, a hugely successful essay writing competition saw 700 young people from across this country write, and really powerful stuff. That competition is underway at the moment, and we think we will get a huge response as well. And just reading the kinds of thinking about young people and issues of race and identity has been hugely insightful for us and other academics who are now looking at this work that's coming through. And that's just some of the work, the youth-related work of the foundation. We also do a lot of history work. Currently, there's an oral history project with Rita and Zanga underway in Soweto to understand that area of work. And together with that, there'll be probably 4 other publications that we will launch in August relating to women involved in the struggle. And that's part of the oral history work that we're doing. The work of the foundation in the last 2 years took us in a new direction which we had not anticipated. Kathrada's funeral threw us into dealing with the phenomenon of state capture, public mobilization on this thing, and eventually landed the foundation in a coordinating role of a broader civil society formation called Future South Africa. We are now beginning to look at the follow-up conference to Future South Africa in July, August, to look at what still needs to be done. That gathering brought 130 civil society organizations together to look at where are the pressure points and what their responsibilities are. The second area of coalition building that we're involved in is anti-racism. Together with the Mandela Foundation, we had established the Anti-Racism Network of South Africa almost three years ago. The first 2 years were very powerful. Last year, we could not sustain it. We had to let the coordinator go. We are now in the process of reactivating that network. I'm leaving on the 19th to go to Lisbon to participate in the European Network Against Racism's General Assembly to start developing global networks, because racism today is highly organized by the right wing and requires a globally coordinated response as well. And we think we can play some of that kind of role to begin to move in that direction. A third and completely unrelated coalition, building of coalitions, has got the foundation involved in dealing with rock throwing on the N12 freeway, where we've brought together communities of the freeway to begin to look at how do they respond to that. Very difficult work, but I think that there might be some results from there. So coalition building is a completely new direction. Yesterday, Gauteng Department of Education were in our office looking for support to deal with issues of racism in schools in Western area and Carltonville. And that's the work that we've done previously with at least in Gauteng, that we are now looking at how else we can support that particular district and develop the models for all other districts to begin to deal with. The foundation this year developed an anti-racism reporting app, which we've piloted for about a week during Anti-Racism Week. Hugely successful. We're refining the technicalities of that. And using that, we will start consulting with all kinds of organizations to endorse, but to also be open to the idea of acting as referral organizations for all the issues that are coming through. So in the first week, at least 300 complaints came through. And they were very, very serious stuff. And we know that once we open this thing up nationally, it will require a huge infrastructure across the country to begin to deal with this, which has brought us to a point where we are now contemplating, and our board will most likely agree over the weekend, for a huge fundraising drive and a national call for support for a fund to combat racism in this country. If that is approved, most likely on Kathrada's birthday on the 21st of August, we will make that appeal. Because it's areas of work that we just can't get sufficient funding for. Like the Mandela Foundation, we receive no support from government. The last 10 years, we could not ask for that kind of support. We just principally could not accept that kind of money. Now that there's some change, we are re-looking at that. Our other obstacle to fundraising was that our first chairperson was Cyril Ramaphosa, and people assumed we had lots of money and didn't want to really give us much of that. Our third obstacle was that we hosted a very successful golf day to raise money. After Kathrada's letter to Zuma, nobody wanted to come on board. 50% of our operational funding dried up, which is why we had to scale down considerably. Things are changing now. So our funding sources have not been donor funding, has not been government, has really been individuals by and large contributing to the foundation. We are now understanding that there are donors, and we're looking at the art of writing donor applications and so forth, and we need to start doing that kind of work. So in a nutshell, that's last area of work for us, very important, is international solidarity, particularly Palestinians and Palestinian political prisoners. We've championed an international campaign for the release of Marwan Barghouti and all other prisoners. And there's been ongoing engagements around that and a global campaign that the foundation has really been involved in. We will, as the Mandela Foundation, we're in the process of reviewing our mandate now that Kathrada is gone, and we're needing to refine our focus areas. 2019 is when we hope to conclude a lot of this and initiate a 10-year program that culminates in 2029, which would have been Kathy's centenary. So we're really looking at a 10-year focus area to dedicate our kind of attention. What that's going to be is still up for discussion. So that's really where we are and possibly where we might be going to. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you for the round of applause there. That's from the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation. Let's hand it over now to Dennis Hurley Center.
Thank you. I'm not directly involved in the Dennis Hurley Center, but I did work with Archbishop Dennis Hurley over many years. I was asked by Raymond Perrier, who's the director of the Dennis Hurley Center in Durban, to come to this meeting this evening, and then Derek approached me and asked whether I would speak on behalf of a faith-based organization, as it were. So this is rather different from the other foundations, which are, of course, have quite specific political connections. But just a few words about Dennis Hurley himself. Older people will remember him. Younger people probably don't know who he was. But he was a courageous opponent of South Africa's apartheid regime over a period of 50 years. As Archbishop of the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Durban. He was born in Cape Town in 1915, and he became the youngest Catholic bishop in the world in 1947 at 31 years of age, and he became Archbishop in 1951. He retired in 1992 and died in 2004. Now, he was a very influential churchman in South Africa and also internationally. But I just will focus on his role in relation to social justice in South Africa. He had a passion for social justice, not only denouncing injustice, but looking beyond it to building a better society and working for human dignity and promoting development, applying the Catholic Church's social teachings to the situation in this country and giving moral and intellectual leadership, not only in the Roman Catholic Church, but more widely, and also associating himself very directly and personally with oppressed and suffering people. And he took up cudgels on their behalf to be, as it were, a prophet in word and action. In 1951, going right back, he was then young, but he was chair of the South African Catholic Bishops' Conference, and he drafted the first of the groundbreaking pastoral letters in which the bishops denounced apartheid as a blasphemy and intrinsically evil. It's 1951. But those were words. What about actions? Well, among other things, he recognized the importance of having institutions which would carry out activities and focus them and devise them. And so in 1968, he established a Commission for Justice and Peace in the Durban Archdiocese, and a little later, in fact, the Catholic bishops in South Africa established a National Justice and Peace Commission. He also, in the early 70s, established an organization, Diaconia, which really grew in some ways out of the Justice and Peace Commission, because the Justice and Peace Commission said, look, we need full-time workers. And Hurley's response was, in fact, to say, look, not just within the Catholic Church, but let's work collaboratively with other churches in the Durban area, with the Natal Council of Churches. And Diaconia, through a process of consultation, was established in 1976, with the churches pooling their resources in the Durban area to focus on social action. And I just want to say this about diaconia, because it has a bearing on the Hurley Centre, that in the late 70s and the early 80s, the Diaconia Centre became a resource and a haven for community activists, a beacon of light and support during the state of emergency, and in the early 1990s, a resource for the peace processes in KZN. And as the Diaconia website notes currently, there was a time when anybody in Durban suffering as a result of the actions of the apartheid government would be told, go to Diaconia, they'll help you, and help would be found. Of course, Hurley himself was involved in many other dimensions. He was a great champion of the open schools movement, which was a defiance campaign during the 70s and 80s, in which the church schools were opened to people of all races in the face of threats, dire threats from government. He provided personally direct support to people who were suffering, for example, forced removals, and Lime Hill comes to mind. Then dramatically, and dramatic gestures are important. In Durban, on Good Friday, a procession was organized annually in solidarity with suffering people. Started initially with solidarity with treason trialists incarcerated in the Durban Central Prison. But this won a great deal of international attention. Again, very important publicity during the 80s particularly. And Hurley was at the center of this, in that procession, carrying a cross, as other religious leaders did too there. And he gave his great personal support to the foundation of the Detainees Support Committee, Conscientious Objector Support Group, spoke out against Kufut atrocities in Namibia and was charged and taken to court on that, and the charges then dropped because it became clear that Hurley would actually be able to provide evidence of the atrocities, and so on. So there we are. There's just a slight sketch of Hurley. Now, what about the Dennis Hurley Centre? This is a living monument to him, not only as a hero of social justice, but also as a leader with a visionary commitment to ecumenical and interfaith action and friendship. So that collaboration, I think, is at the heart of the idea of the Hurley Centre. It's a centre which is a major new landmark building, 4 stories high, in what is probably the busiest and most vibrant and diverse area of Durban, situated between the Catholic Cathedral, the Grey Street Mosque, the Victoria Street Market. It's an area swarming with street traders and taxis. And the Hurley Centre, which opened in 2015, officially on the anniversary of Archbishop Hurley's 100th birthday, aims to serve the needs of the poorest people in Durban in cooperation with people of all faith traditions and also with corporate donors, business, educational institutions and government, local and provincial government. It was conceptualized not by Hurley, it's a memorial to him. It was conceptualized by Paddy Carney, who worked very closely with Hurley as a director of Diaconia over the years. And after Hurley's death, Paddy Carney became the project coordinator and a key fundraiser for the centre. It hosts a number of outreach projects, social outreach projects, and it also has facilities, rooms of various sizes for hire and for use by the communities. Now, it's very closely linked to the cathedral parish, the Catholic Cathedral parish, but it also reaches out to and works with other members of the local communities, the mosque next door. Just incidentally, by the way, perhaps particularly on the last day of the fast, it's important, I think, to note that Hurley himself, in his last years, after retired as Archbishop, was attached to the cathedral just as a parish priest, and used to go to mosque and pray there. And that is also a tradition which is carried on, perhaps a little surprisingly, by the current Archbishop of Durban, Cardinal Napier, who goes to mosque. The centre works with traders and shoppers from the Warwick Junction markets, members of other city centre churches and faith groups, and other performers and local people. And it aims to continue the legacy and work of Hurley, in particular by engaging with the modern world as a community serving humanity, which is a phrase that Hurley had invented, in fact, coined, reaching out to very poor and marginalized residents in this part of Durban, and working with refugees from other parts of the continent, cooperating with all faith traditions, challenging injustices and being a voice for the voiceless, and finding ways to work with educational and research institutions and other partners, and working with government institutions as well, but being willing to challenge them. Its many activities include feeding the hungry, serving something like 1,500 hot meals every week to homeless people. And the kitchen, which prepares those meals, is a halal kitchen because Catholic and Muslim women cooperate there in the cooking. Caring for the sick, there's a clinic that sees 2,000 people a month, providing free basic primary health care and counselling, especially for people affected by AIDS and drug-resistant TB. Also going out to people living on the streets to offer HIV tests and medicines, and linking home-based care services for people who are infected and affected by HIV, particularly orphans and vulnerable children. Then there's a dimension of welcoming the stranger, providing practical help for refugees and migrants from across Africa, seeing that they gain access to adequate treatment and social services, and helping them with documentation and so on. Education and training, English and Zulu lessons for refugees, getting their children registered in local schools, training in various skills such as sewing, computer classes and other job skills, and working, in fact, with the local university to provide health education to busy commuters in the area and so on. And then just generally focused on building social cohesion in a multicultural context, with talks and other activities and lectures and film screens and performances and conferences, and providing, for instance, a forum for drug users and local police to meet and talk, and so on. Now, I asked the Raymond Perrier for some of his thoughts on the centre. What is obvious at this stage is that it is, in its first 3 years of existence, not focused on public policy directly, but perhaps more widely thinking about foundations and named after individuals. It's important not only to look back to the person, but also to the future. Hurley was a person. He was not simply a cause or an idea, but what were his underlying principles? And then one must say that principles must not just be frozen in time, but responsive to changing circumstances. In what fields did he see the need to be present then, and what would he see now? There's the focus on marginalized people, on powerless people, on the poorest of the poor, on people with little or no hope, in the context of political and social and economic structures. And Hurley used the phrase often enough in his public speaking about sin, structural sin, sin that is built into social and economic structures and practices. And then there's the importance not just of serving people, as Hurley would see, but also of advocacy. And so the question becomes, how do you present the case as an advocate or as advocates? What does this imply for activist interventions? There was Hurley's strong emphasis on human dignity, so that it was important for him to see people not only as objects of policy or of objects of pity, but actually as agents themselves. So how do you strengthen agency? How do you support people's actions? And then there was the question of challenging. And we need to challenge both ourselves and others. Raymond Perrier said to me that when they have tours of the centre, of school groups and other people and so on, he said, there's an exhibition of gallery of pictures and so on. Explicitly, the challenge that is posed to people is, which pictures inspire you? What do you think Dennis Hurley would do today? Implicitly, what would he stand for today and tomorrow? And how do we take those values forward? Then there's the style of action, the style of action which is collaborative, ecumenical and interfaith. And therefore the point is that we must focus on what we have in common in collaboration, not on what separates us. And that we must be prepared to challenge and speak the truth. And Raymond Perrier told me just a little anecdote here, which I'd like to conclude with. The relationship, for example, with the eThekwini municipality is important for all kinds of reasons. Now, in 2016, as you may remember, there was the International AIDS Conference in Durban. The municipality, in preparing for this international conference, cleared homeless people off the streets. Paradoxically, of course, in so doing, in order to present a good face, denying those very people access to ARVs. And the Dennis Hurley Center took this up and, in fact, brought this to the attention of Al Jazeera, where the story became the news lead on the global channels. But as Raymond said, well, the Hurley Center still gets invited to meet with events organized by the municipality and to participate in their conferences and discussions. So, here we are.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much. A round of applause there to the Dennis Hurley Center. Quite a lot to take in, but we'll move it right along. We'll come back to the CEO of the Mzala Nxumalo Center. For now, though, let's hear from the Tambo Foundation.
Thank you very much and good evening. So the Oliver and Adelaide Tambo Foundation was established in 2011, although OR passed away in 1993, which is almost 8 years since his passing that the foundation came to be, which makes us roughly 7 years old this year. And I must say, I was quite intrigued when I received the invitation because my attention was much more captured by the question, why foundations? And it's because it's been a niggling question for me and quietly circulating also amongst some of us within the foundation and outside the foundation. And for me, the challenge has been, are we really correctly representing the leaders that we try to represent? And are we using the right vehicle? Is the way of the foundation the best way to reveal and bring to the fore the very qualities, the very character, and the very legacy that we want society today to benefit from? Somewhere, as Vene was talking, you said, I don't know if it came from the study or some of the difficult questions you asked yourself, but it was about representing the person or the purpose. And I think we get a bit clouded in the fight to be unique as foundations, different from others, that I think we've actually veered a bit from the purpose, but to the uniqueness of the name and the individuals, to a point where sometimes I wonder, because we are representatives of leaders that have gone by. And I always say, are we doing, to whose interest and benefit are we doing what we're doing? Maybe I'm a bit lucky because I'm female and I'm from the Oliver Tambo Foundation, so there's no way I can ever dream of being OR. But I wonder if, Shan, sometimes you don't even think like Uncle Kathy. And not by choice, by the way. And for me, that's one of the difficult questions that I think, if we really want to deal with the challenges that South Africa has, and we want to charter the very courage and foreground the changes that our leaders brought against all odds, we need to ask ourselves. When I look at what we do, and I think another speaker did say a bit of that, if you were to read the script of the Tambo Foundation, you simply have to remove the name Tambo Foundation. You can plonk some of the Kathrada work that they're doing onto that. The Luthuli Foundations, the issues you raised are the very same issues. We just try and present them differently because we want to emerge different so that they can say, aha, that's the Tambo Foundation work. But in essence, when you really peel this onion, we are all trying to do the same thing. You talk of education, the drive, the vision to get everybody properly educated, we all share. And for me, as such, the ultimate question I've started asking is, couldn't we represent these legacies differently? Couldn't we come together? Because we're representing the legacies of our liberation leaders. We could have probably even benefited from the ones that recently departed. During their time, they could have probably even advised us better. Couldn't we form a unified structure for South Africa that champions all these themes that we're talking about, so that if out of the plan, the 10-year, the 5-year plan we put down, we are saying racism is an evil in society. The drive could be coming from a room named the Kathrada Room in this huge institution where we sit. And when that initiative happens, all of us are behind it. We are not behind it as the Kathrada issue. We are behind it as a South African issue that needs to be addressed and pushed at the best that we can do as a collective, because these are leaders that lived as a collective and led. At no point OR tried to be better than Madiba and Luthuli and Sisulu. At best, he belittled himself to them. Actually, there's a long-standing anecdote of OR and Madiba when they met in Stockholm. And every time they tried to get up and go, each one of them would say, after you, no, no, after you, no, no, after you, because they forever respected each other and foregrounded each other. OR never championed the 30 years he spent in exile as an OR program, but he made it a fight to liberate South African leaders and bring them back so that as a collective, we are stronger. But when you look at foundations, we don't operate like that. We operate as a Mandela thing that wants to make Mandela the best. Even with our best attempt, we are humble, we try hard to say it shouldn't be, but it ends up being because we're becoming brands. You talk about Adidas. Adidas doesn't care about Puma and Nike. Adidas want to be the boss of everything. And we're beginning to even sometimes call ourselves brands. And I think we fall into that trap. The Tambo Foundation has just gone through a deep reflection of saying, who are we? What work should we really be doing, and with what resources? We've all lamented the difficulty of resources. Imagine if we pulled our weight just behind racism. And if we made education, Luthuli, Mzala, and OR, even Madiba, but though Madiba's list is too long, but if you just say Luthuli, Mzala, and OR, education was just so central. If we truly go for education and the rest of the other team members push with us, imagine what we could do. If we look at the African agenda and we say Africa has to really come through its struggles, the Thabo Mbeki Foundation says to us every now and then, we feel naked. We are in the continent, but the work we do is the work that OR started. Where are you? We should be shoulder to shoulder in this work. It doesn't even stop with the two of them. It's all of us. When Luthuli asked OR to leave, he understood the implication and the meaning of that, and it was to liberate South Africa, but at the end to liberate the African continent. So for me, comrades, colleagues, friends, those are the questions that I think we will continue to not make inroads and still come back here and say the youth are asking us difficult questions, because I don't think we are using the right tools, the right vehicles, to make sure that South Africa and Africa really changes for the better in the same dream that our leaders that we purport to represent gave their lives to that dream. We're doing it with the best of intentions, but I think sometimes the methods and the way we go about it is self-defeating. And I think that's precisely the only reason I came tonight, when I saw the question, why foundations? Thank you.
As we look to solutions to answer the questions, the probing questions that the youth are asking out there, maybe perhaps, as the Tambo Foundation has alluded to, maybe it is time to form a unified structure, because there's a common theme. Everyone who represents the different foundations here talks about the common good that all of these great people stood for.
Foundation that I'm talking about. They want me to make money and do all 20 million things
like
that everybody is doing.
Oh yes, indeed. Now we note that. But you hit the nail on the head. There's a common cause across all these foundations. They represent what those great stalwarts represented, and it's common. It's reflected across all the speakers that they stood for public good. So everybody's doing the same thing. Maybe perhaps a different approach is what's needed. Maybe that's what's causing this disconnect with the youth, because they're hearing more of the same thing. But of course, there's still the big question. In fact, I'll borrow from a song, because music is also part of what I do within the radio business. Janet Jackson had a song that says, "What have you done for me lately?" I guess that's that's what the youth are also asking. What have you done for me lately? I mean, they need to see tangible things. Maybe they're there, but they're not showcased enough. A different approach, perhaps. But of course, as I mentioned earlier, when in our opening remarks, let's hear now from the CEO of the Mzala Nxumalo Center, Mr. Jabu. Jabulani Stola.
Yeah. Some people call me Jabu. Thanks, Program Director. I must actually start by saying I'm coming from a pretty large and pretty big family. We were 7 boys. I'm boy number 7 and 2 daughters. The reason why I'm saying this, the articulation that I had from the speaker that I'm succeeding, I'm just talking after, is such that I was saying, if I were at home, I would have said, let's actually discuss it, because it sums up essentially, I concur with you, essentially the sort of point that actually brought us here. But nonetheless, let me just go back very briefly. Derek did say we are a young center, not a foundation. We need to say that. We were formed in 2015 with a view, of course, of taking forward the legacy of Mzala Nxumalo. I think we are still at a formative stage ourselves, because part of what we're actually looking at are the various components of what can be done to ensure that the legacy goes forward. But one of the very key points that I think I need to emphasize, because it's actually going to be a point that brought us to this kind of dialogue, to say we need to talk, to echo exactly the points that were made by the Oliver and Adelaide Tambo Foundation, was the idea of the national question. Because it seems to me that the questions that are being asked by the youth are talking precisely to the points that I had coming from the Dennis Haley Foundation, coming from the Ahmed Kadrada Foundation, from each one of you. Perhaps that's an advantage of talking last, but also a disadvantage if you are younger, because you know you need to keep quiet and learn. Because the whole idea of the national question in South Africa, I think more often than not, which was a preoccupation of Mzala, he was not the initiator, he was joining something that was actually confronting the South African sort of struggle, as it were. It started way back, and he joins that. But the key question was, South Africa needs to have a non-racial, non-sexist, democratic South Africa, so that we can actually begin to talk of the South African nationhood. Meaning, in other words, the key point, which I would want to actually go back to the question we've been asked in different forums. The key point is to address the issue of historical injustice in this country. Now, why is that important nowadays? I think there are things that we all accept, but we are not actually adopting the approach that I think I support, which was actually being proposed here, which we need to discuss, is the fact that it's known in South Africa, we all accept in this country, that we are one of the most unequal society. The gap between the rich and the poor, the social inequality is growing on an ongoing basis since 1994. It's a known fact. It's there even in your national development plan. There are all commitments around it. We all know that there is poverty in this country, and it's growing poverty. And of course, if you travel around the country, you go to various communities, or even if you look at your media, your TV and the various forms of media, poverty, it's evident. There is poverty in this country. Unemployment is growing. But then the question is, why am I raising this issue? I think a number of the questions that were asked by the young people were talking to those issues, essentially. It's just that they were not couching that along the same lines. Because the key issue that came up, which we were confronted with, came out of a conference we had last year in June, where we put together all organizations that have committed themselves on the left agenda in Durban. And the young people were amongst those that were discussing the issue, and there were those that were for the fees must fall. And some of the issues that they were raising was about access to basic education, and to higher education and basic education, higher education in particular, around the issue of fees must fall, which is an issue that I had colleagues coming up with. More recently, the issues that have been raised are issues around the whole idea of fear. We need to actually accept that this country is living through a very terrible sort of condition of fear. If we talk of non-racialism, we talk of non-sexism, and we talk of human dignity and human freedom, which I think are an embodiment of that national question, if it's to be resolved. If you look at the kinds of programs that we even have in the country, this country has what is known as the 16 days of activism against violence against women and children. Surely, we can't actually be devoting 60 days. It should be part of our value system. Because if you are serious about it, Chief Albert Luthuli recognized as early as the 1940s that letter he writes on the 16th of March 1944, calling on women to be represented in the Zulu Royal sort of Council, saying the Zulu Royal family cannot really ignore the majority of people in the 40s. And of course, throughout his leadership, if I may look at Luthuli in this case, he was talking about human freedom and human dignity. But today, we are confronted by that very issue. So when those questions are asked, they are talking to that issue. Should we be having a situation where today, in the news, a 10-year-old had to be taken to a place of safety because there is a father who's a stepfather who's abusing that child? And it's a widespread thing. The colleague from the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation talks about fear. About the issue of a father who accidentally shot a young man that I'm now learning was actually actively involved in the foundation work. One of the people raised the issue around fear and said, look, what kind of society are we living in where this very unfortunate old person takes his child to school, obviously takes a nap because he has been working very hard during the day, but then is shocked when the child comes back to knock and accidentally shoots the father. So both the father is a victim, the mother is a victim, the family is a victim, and a whole range of other people. There is a society that we live in is facing fear. But much more importantly, the people in some of these forums have raised issues around violence. I'm looking at the Dennis Haley Foundation. The faith-based organizations played a pivotal role in the late 80s. In mobilizing against the apartheid state when there was a low-intensity warfare, Operation Marion in KZN. But today, just between 2016 and now, in Pietermaritzburg alone, 16 people have been killed. Now, those are the ones that have been recorded, if I may say so. How many others have been killed without us knowing? The Northwest, we have been seeing cases and everywhere. So basically, the issue that I think actually brought us here is we are actually in a situation where each of these leaders whose names are used in setting up the foundations and the centers would actually be shocked to look at the kinds of challenges that we're facing today. And it's therefore necessary that we need to start forging some kind of coordination and cooperation to address these issues. Because as the Mzala Center, we did say, you are most welcome. The young people who were actually at the conference were still planning a conference where we bring all of them around the country to talk out these issues on their own, because obviously I cannot imagine myself being a high school student or a university student. I was actually on campus for a number of years as a lecturer. I can't actually then imagine myself sitting where they are and actually articulating exactly the same kind of position. They need to talk amongst themselves. But obviously, it can't actually be a Mzala Center that does it because it affects almost everyone. I'm delighted I was aware that the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation was at VETS at the time. So where is the coordination? Because it seems to be the issue to begin to make a contribution towards this. Much more importantly, the issue of violence is not limited to KZN. It's out here in the Northwest and elsewhere. If Dennis Haley was to be here, what would he be saying about these sort of issues? Why is it that at this day and time, we are not actually calling a spade a spade? Because surely part of the legacy thing is to call it a spade a spade. A number of the killings, the factionalism that we are witnessing, mushrooming everywhere around the country, have nothing to do with providing the basic services to the people of South Africa and ensuring that there is that human dignity and human freedom. But is to a large extent what is now an order of the day. An attempt by those who are not actually involved in business to perpetuate a system of looting. It has been called state capture in some places. It's looting, it's kleptocracy, it's daylight robbery, if you like, if you want to call it that. And some of these people are actually involved in what one can actually call, it, for a lack of a better word, some kind of, if you like, primitive sort of kleptocracy, because it's supposed to be primitive accumulation. You rob people in broad daylight. You want this faction to be in the list next year. I think we're going to see more killings taking place in some places. In the list for next year for the elections, to ensure that those are the people who will be in a pole position for them to start looting the state. And that has nothing to do with what all these sort of leaders represented, and the 57 others that we mentioned they represented. They would have loved to see a South Africa that is actually ensuring human dignity, human freedom, that ensures that there is an attempt, a very systematic attempt. I'm not denying that there's nothing has been done since 1994. A lot has been achieved. There are so many compacts that are there. But what is it that we can actually ensure that people are not saying, we're afraid, we may be killed, there is violence that goes on, there is poverty, there is hunger. It was on the basis of that they are raising these issues. They are not doubting that there is activism, but they are saying, where is the coordination, so that at least we can then talk of a South African nationhood that actually abhors racism, abhors sexism, that abhors the exploitation of one person by another. Perhaps let me just pause it at that then.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you. A round of applause as well to the CEO of the Mzala Nxumalo Center, of course, Jabulani Sithole. So we've heard the different visions, well, I dare say not different as the Oliver Tambo and Adelaide Foundation, the Tambo Foundation has articulated. There's a common cause. Maybe we need a new approach altogether. So to set up the dialogue that I believe will be robust and will get some kind of a sense, if you will, as to how we can deconscientize the youth and try and address some of these pertinent questions that they are asking. So I did a bit of research, went online, and I came across this piece here, if you would indulge me, because most of the foundations highlighted the issue around funding, lack of funding. I heard Luthuli Foundation and the Kathrada Foundation also alluding to that, but I suppose it's every foundation's objectives or primary objective to raise funds and also do the public good that comes with it. Do donors give to the causes they feel are most worthy, or do they give because they are asked? The reality, it says, is a bit of both. Donors' decisions are driven by personal taste, experience, and empathy for the cause in question. However, being asked remains the single biggest factor in donors' giving, meaning that most donors and funders are unlikely to seek out charitable causes beyond their normal frame of reference or experience. Now, this can mean that it is even more difficult for charities outside of these frameworks to gain funders' attention, so they need to work even harder to make their causes visible and compelling as well. And this gives rise to a number of barriers charities need to overcome in order to maximize their philanthropic reach as well, including how they frame their causes and how they ask for this money, and whether they do indeed invest in fundraising. So it answers in part, as I said, a common issue that came up, the issue of fundraising. But in of itself, I think lies an answer in part, I'm thinking out loud. Isn't that part of the disconnect with the very youth that are asking these probing questions, that perhaps you need a different way, a different approach of communicating your causes and what the various foundations stand for? And as I said, without belaboring the point, the Tambo Foundation has already alluded to the fact that there needs to be a different approach for the various foundations sitting here. One of them, as the Tambo Foundation has suggested, a unified approach perhaps is the way to go. Because I too, as a parent, probably have a duty to do in conscientizing my own children about the work that these foundations stand for and what they represent. It's a challenge to keep the message alive and keep my own children conscientized. But can you imagine when you talk about the youth that's faced with real problems, hashtag fees must fall, and all the other challenges that confront them. And when they are found wanting in terms of getting to grips as to what these foundations do, we have a challenge. You want to go first, Mr. Mtunzi?
Yeah, you know, I don't want to go too much into the issue of funding, but I've got a few points that I want to raise. The first one does have something to do with funding, and it's the proposal that Linda was making. It makes sense. I think all of these leaders firstly work together, as she said. You know, they Tambo, Luthuli, Mandela, Ahmed Kathrada. In fact, Luthuli even worked with Dennis Hurley. You know, because Chief Luthuli was also a very religious person. He was a preacher in church. So it makes sense. It'll also, you know, ensure that our efforts, you know, have more momentum. We could probably cut costs, you know, and be able to achieve more with less or fewer financial resources. So there are merits to what Linda is saying. However, my experience of firstly, one of the objectives of these foundations is to foster what I call transgenerational sustenance of the values that embodied these iconic leaders. And that's important because people are often inspired by individuals, okay? And not just values, you know, but if they're embodied by somebody who captures your imagination, then, you know, the people that, you know, look up to that icon or that individual will then be moved, you know, they will try and live the values of those people. And as a result, we stand a better chance then of getting good leaders in future. So, whilst I agree with Linda, I would be careful not to drop that aspect of what these foundations are trying to do. I mean, maybe we're not good at presenting these leaders. You know, when the movie Black Panther came out, you know, it captured the imagination of everybody, including myself. I said when I saw that, I said, this is going to be a big hit. And it became a big hit. And I thought to myself, maybe this is how we should, present our leaders to society, in a way that will really capture their imagination, the Black Panther type thing. Yeah, so there may be other proposals, but I think the reality is perhaps we're not doing it right. Perhaps there are better ways of doing it. So that's that. A silly example. When we were growing up, we used to watch kung fu movies. Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan and all of these people. And they used to capture our imagination as kids. I mean, we thought they were just out of this world. That fascination about kung fu never left me, And I never got a chance to go to a kung fu school until I was in my 40s. And I did, because I still wanted to be like Bruce Lee or Jackie Chan and do the things that they did. What I'm trying to say, I'm trying to emphasize the point of preserving the iconic image of these people and promoting it, because it can inspire people. My problem with what we're doing in South Africa, and I must say I blame our current leaders and maybe us as well, but the task lies mainly with our current leaders in government. You see, so you can never achieve social cohesion without people feeling that they are economically empowered. In fact, when you have this social gap, this wealth gap, you will never ever achieve social cohesion, because, poor people don't go to places where rich people go. It's just a fact of life. And rich people don't go to places where poor people go. And it's worse in South Africa because that wealth gap is also along racial lines largely, although that's beginning to change a bit. But so you will always have the differences in society. You will never achieve social cohesion until we do something about economic transformation. It's extremely, extremely important. Even traditionally, for instance, in the Zulu culture, and I know this applies to many other nationalities and tribes in South Africa and Africa in general. You become a Mnumzane when you can take good care of your family. You have your piece of land, you have cattle, you have children that are well fed, etc., etc. Then you become a Mnumzane, a proud Mnumzane, head of the family. Okay. It comes with financial independence and economic empowerment. You see. Now, when people are destitute, it's impossible. It's impossible for people to feel that they are part of a society, to feel proud, and to feel that there are people that can contribute to the well-being of society in the country. And so if we don't address this issue, we will never, ever achieve social cohesion. The second point is the educational aspect of things. And it's a shame that we have handled education in this country in the way that we have. We can say whatever government ministers of education, so they can say whatever. The education system is in shambles. Again, a person with a PhD is unlikely to hold a conversation with an uneducated person that, he finds particularly stimulating, and that, he wishes he could spend 5 hours with this person around the table. And vice versa, by the way. If this educated person with a PhD talks to, the guy who has a standard 5 and works in a mine somewhere, that guy might think that this professor is boring. What I'm trying to say is that inherent to social cohesion is the ability for people to talk and interact and exchange ideas and formulate programs that are for the benefit of society. And if you have that educational gap, you will never have those interactions. And therefore, you will never break those mental and cultural barriers. And prejudices, racism, and other forms of prejudices, religious prejudices, will persist. And so for me, some of the most important things that we have to work towards as foundations and with the youth is to make sure that at an economic level, things change. I will leave it there for now. I have many ideas about why things are not changing. It's a sad thing, again. It's because the current leaders do not live the values of the icons that are represented by these foundations. Many of them are bought by capital to maintain the status quo. To this day, 90% of government procurement spend goes to white companies. Why is that? When the very policy of government says that's what we need to change. What's stopping them from changing it? It's because a lot of them are actually bought by white capital. And if you get bought, it's because you have no ethics. I will leave it there for now.
Thank you so much. That's from the Luthuli Foundation. But I guess the question is still out there. I mean, how do we get young people energized to see the public good that's coming out of these foundations? Or I think I'll pause it at that point for now as well. Safe to say, one other common factor that was raised by the Mandela Foundation, echoed by Tambo Foundation, is that these foundations tend to be person-focused and not purpose-focused. Let's just ponder on that idea and hand over to the Kathrada Foundation.
No, I wanted to come back to the issues that Linda raised. There have been attempts, and in fact, the Luthuli Foundation has been part of an attempt to bring together foundations. There's a whole national initiative of foundations, a dialogue initiative. So there are attempts to do that. I think we would be jumping steps to move towards creating something bigger. It assumes there's commonality. I think our experience of observing the National Foundation's Dialogue Initiative, there are huge ideological issues amongst foundations. The founders might come from a particular political movement, but even that movement itself has got its own divisions. And we can't gloss over some of those things. And there are other foundations who are named after other icons or liberation, no, well, not liberations, but for example, you take in the Dialogue Initiative, there's the Declare Foundation. And so part of our own reservations there was that we needed to have a dialogue amongst ourselves about what we thought was common before we engaged the South African public in a national dialogue initiative, because there was no commonality on a whole range of things. Between ourselves and the Mandela Foundation, we've been having, for the last good few years, an ongoing engagement of what we mean by non-racialism, whether it's relevant or not, what do we mean by racism, its features, and how do we tackle it. So I think there would be value in foundations being brought together to begin to at least engage on the range of issues that I think have been identified and what we think that the responses are, and also identify who's doing what and where. And where there are points of collaboration, I would think that we must strengthen those. Because there is value in this diversity of foundations across the country. I think that when you look at the spread of these foundations, right through from Kuruman to wherever else, people have started setting them up. And the beauty of it is that many of them are outside of the political institutions. And in most cases are beginning to be an alternative voice rather than just the normal adherence to or giving just political parties the dominance that has prevailed in this country for a long time. The power of political parties, I think, has been dimmed significantly by alternative voices, amongst others by foundations of this kind. And I don't think we should just pull that all together now. I think we would weaken that voice significantly. But I think the issue of young people, if young people were expecting foundations to be at the forefront of struggles, that would be a misplaced understanding of what foundations do. The focus, and if you look at equal education as a model, and at least we have some relationship with what they do and some support here and there. But that is a movement of young people today that I have profound respect for. They have developed the art of being activists around an issue and have pushed the boundaries on key issues. And there's a youth movement there. It's a powerful youth movement, 6,000 to 8,000 young people every week who meet in schools, identify an issue, mobilize, organize around it, and build. What we as foundations do is to offer support to movements like that when and if it's necessary. And if you take the recent crisis that they had, they convened a whole range of us together and to say, well, how do we deal with this? We were able to offer advice. And they took some of it, and others, they didn't. So foundations are very limiting structures. They can be a good moral voice. They can act as activators. They can act as they've got good convening abilities. But I think there would be an overplaced emphasis on their ability to really move society in a different direction. Foundations plus other actors can do that. Foundations on their own, I don't think so.
I think that's an important point to raise, I suppose, to even take our discussion forward. What the Kathrada Foundation is raising there, that foundations in of themselves are not the ones to go to the streets and march. But if you refer back to the issue I raised, as I said, the young people, will go to the young people in a moment, that the young people feel, in fact, they're asking questions, making reference to fees must fall, where were the foundations? Roads must fall, where were the foundations? It raises the question, because if you look at these foundations and who they represent, all these stalwarts stood for those things. I mean, they were participants. They were there in the streets and everything else. So didn't the message get lost there, or that disconnect that I spoke about even with Derek last night over dinner, that there's a disconnect with the foundations and how they are run. That's why the youth is expecting the foundation to do what the stalwarts did, or whose name in which the foundation is represented. You see what I mean? And we are saying, the Kathrada Foundation is saying, they would like to know what the youth are doing, what cause do they stand for? But they are within their rights to say, what has the foundation done for me lately? If because they don't know what their cause is. Whose duty is that? To conscientize them? I don't know. I think there's a good point to start. I know you're raring to go. We can, is there another mic there? Okay.
My name's Nkululeko Tselane. I think I identify as the frustrated youth as well. I think, first of all, maybe before I get to my points, because I've got many things that I'd like to say, but I think first of all, the best way to address the us is to listen to us and give us more spaces to talk. I think this was actually very beautiful, because I think it was very metaphorical for what's actually happening. We get very frustrated. You guys then go and talk amongst yourselves and say, you know, we really need to start listening to these guys, and it's really bad. And then we get frustrated and say, guys, please listen to us. And you go back to each other again and say, yeah, no, we have to inspect and really think about how we can start listening. I think just listen, and then maybe take direction from us a bit more in terms of moving forward, because I think you talk about listening instead of actually listening. But I think maybe another problem is when you're the youth at an event, you know, sometimes we're expected to be the voice of rage, but I think the moderator perfectly captured it in your preamble to this entire panel discussion. But I think what needs to happen, from my perspective, when it comes to foundations, is that I think they all need to close. There's no point, right? What you need to do, I think, is rather change them into museums instead of trying to keep that vehicle as a foundation. Because what happens is I think you put yourselves in the nonsensical hypothetical situation where you have to always be, what would Mandela do? What would Kathrada do? Which is ridiculous, because they're dead. So what you have to do is you have to take those memories, crystallize them in a museum format, so that we can say, oh, okay, this is who Mandela was, this is who Tambo was, this is what he stood for, and we can take the lessons from that, instead of trying to put it into a foundation. And then also the problem with having the foundations is that now you have had so many things to say, now I'm losing my train of thought, but it's fine. But I think, oh yes, because then what happens with your foundations is that what I think you've done is you haven't crystallized the memories of the particular stalwart that you're trying to honor. So what happens is, let's say tomorrow the Tambo Foundation does something that I don't agree with ideologically. Now it's the Tambo brand that is damaged, instead of now Save SA, which is not damaged. So you're actually, I think, relying too much on the names, where you should be actually just going with the values and putting that into an engine, a unified engine, and then you move like that. I think finally, the last point I wanted to make. Oh yes, I think the frustration also comes with foundations, is that because maybe you lack ideology, you don't know what causes to support, so you come when it becomes popular. I think that's why you guys keep on mentioning fees must fall, because at the beginning no one was there except for Kathrada, because Kathrada was also alive. He even came to our mass meetings. But I think that also causes the so what did I just say? Yeah, I should have written that down.
The confusion.
Oh. Yes. The confusion. Sorry, just give me a second. I actually did write that part down. You see, even young people forget things. Blah blah blah. Oh yes. Because yes, you guys come to things when they're already popular, and I think that's what frustrates us also. So you guys keep on talking about fees must fall. We're done with fees must fall. We've accepted it's over. The moment is done. We're moving forward. We're talking about land. I don't know where the foundations are in the conversation of land and expropriation without compensation. What is your view? Or are you going to wait again for then the land to finally be expropriated without compensation? Then you're going to contribute to the conversation. So you're always contributing from a very reactionary point of view instead of looking forward and saying, oh, okay, what are we actually dealing with now? So yeah, I think, so just to complete that thought, close your foundations, museums. Let us honor the people in museums. The Nelson Mandela Museum, you can have a chairman of the Nelson Mandela Museum, you can speak at all these events, it's great. So you've got the museums, and then you guys can put your efforts and your resources into some sort of unified project, whether you call it Save SA, whether you call it New SA, whether you call it South Africa Together, whatever you call it, but we move like that. Sure, thank you.
All right, there you go. That's from from the youth, fiery. You want to pause a little bit and take that in. But I think he's making a very telling point by saying, foundations, and we hear this from politicians. What would Mandela do? And then they paraphrase and quote and, anecdotal. But then as foundations, we are almost, well, I'm not representing a foundation, but, foundations are baffled at why the youth are asking these pertinent questions. But Mandela was in the trenches, was part of the struggle. So was Katrada and Tambo and everyone else represented by the foundations here, Dennis Hurley. They were in the trenches. They were, in the front lines of the struggle. So when you keep referring to the question, as the youth was saying now, what would Mandela do? You are referencing Mandela in the sense that the youth understood them. You see where I'm going. So they expect the foundations to be doing what the style was represented. I don't know if that makes sense, if I just summarize what they're saying. But I want to tie that in before I give the mic back to what Luthuli Foundation was saying. Again, in Parliament, by politicians, they like quoting the stalwarts as well, and making reference and almost to the point of what would stalwart X do in a situation. But then, all too often we hear of corrupt public officials or politicians. You see where I'm going? I'm planting these anecdotes or these pointers here as to why you would have the youth feeling the way they do.
Okay, just very quickly. Maybe in response partly to what Nkululeko was saying. Foundations, there are many advantages to having foundations. One of them is the fact that they are separate from government. And because of who they represent, they have a platform to raise issues without the restrictions that government and other institutions might have. Okay? So, and maybe some of the work that we do is not immediately visible, to the youth, but it certainly does filter down, and they enjoy the benefits of that work. Okay? So maybe we need to talk a bit more so that you understand what we do, and you realize that in fact, perhaps not directly, in some cases indirectly, it does benefit you. Let me give you one example. At the Luthuli Museum, and we work together as a foundation, we normally have the Chief Albert Luthuli Memorial Lecture. It happens once a year. And for a few years, I was proposing from a foundation perspective that we need to have a lecture that is going to talk about why it is that we can't change the constitution of this country. And when we were proposing that to our government partners, they refused completely. And they thought that subject was too sensitive, etc., etc., But a few years ago, we actually did have that lecture. And I always say to people, it was the start of some of the things that are happening now in Nkululeko. Okay? Because we said, look, these leaders did not fight to have a constitution. They fought to see the social changes that they spoke about. And those social changes are enshrined in many documents, the Freedom Charter and others, okay? And so if the Constitution or sections of the Constitution do not help us in achieving the social change that we want, okay, then we must change it. Because it was not, we didn't fight to have a specific a constitution. We actually fought for social change. And the constitution needs to be an enabler of that social change, okay? And to the extent that it is not, we must change it or amend it, okay? And we did have, I think that lecture was in 2015, and we spoke about the issues, land without, expropriation of land without compensation, and other issues related to poverty. We spoke about all of those issues. And we resolved there that we need to push for changes to certain sections of the Constitution. After that, government was able to start talking about it. They felt emboldened to start talking about it. And we see the results of that now, expropriation of land without compensation, for instance. You say you have moved to that point and we are still talking about fees must fall. I'm saying no, we actually started that conversation a few years ago. You see, and sort of laid the foundation, excuse the pun, for these sorts of things and the fight to happen. I'd like to leave it there. So maybe I think what we need to do is we need to really understand and define the role or roles of foundation. What is the role that the foundations should play in society? And maybe they should play a part of what you want them to play. And there's merits, by the way, in what you're saying. I'm not saying there aren't any merits in what the youth is demanding of us. There are merits, but when you say foundations should shut down, you will be removing some of the positive things or taking away some of the positive things that the foundations do.
All right, thank you very much. We'll go with you want to respond from the Tambo Foundation? Yep.
I see today's discussion as planting the seeds, but not completing the process. And I think even when I started with what I started, I wasn't talking about break down Jerusalem and then bring all the walls down overnight and start from scratch. But it's about forcing us to think and reevaluate the platform and the vehicle we're using, because we got caught up in its own governance and operational systems, and we're struggling to fit in. Part of my quest is to say, who do we really account to? Do we account to the 10 board of trustees that sit in there, and yet our mandate is outward? It's about public good. And the questions that we hear from outside, at what point do we go public and account and get a sense of enrichment and realignment and strengthening of what we're doing? And I think it's very easy to justify anything that you're doing for as long as you can carry on doing it. Everything has value to some extent. But the importance here is the depth and the reach of what we're doing and the impatience of the times that we find ourselves in. We don't have that luxury of foreverness anymore. And underlying, I think for me, what I said and what I've heard, I think what's important for us to keep on asking ourselves is, how are we really revealing these leaders to South Africa and to the world today? Are we doing it in a way that it is relevant and it is easy to relate and use and see benefit? Or are we regurgitating it to a point where a Nkululeko can tell us, just go set up a museum and leave it there? Because that's all I can see. I haven't seen how you're translating that legacy to help us move forward. And the questions are not easy, and even the process is not easy. And the process is not saying, let us move from today and say in the next 5 years' time, we will have one entity. It may not even be one entity, but it may be how we operate and how we link. Do I link with the Mandela Foundation because it's easier? Or do I even go deeper and fine-tune the way I work with the Charlotte Maxekes and the Mzalas? And do I even know about the existence of these other people? And I think, Shan, you raised some of the challenges that came out of the dialogue. And the dialogue also still had its own dialogue of foundations, had its own specific niche that it was trying to address. And that can live its own life and get its own feet and test its own worth and impact. But I don't think we need to be that comfortable and almost feed our own economic cycles in the corners where we are and then say we're doing justice until we've tested it and stretched it and asked ourselves the difficult questions. That's why I jumped and I said, by the way, the foundation hasn't mandated me to say, come speak about that here. Because the foundation says, go set up an endowment fund. And the very door I want to knock at yesterday gave an endowment amount to my neighbor foundation. And I'm coming today. Couldn't we have had a better endowment for the causes that we champion in a different approach? I don't know, but it's because we are not talking. And for as long as my brand survives, am I happy? Do I care if Mzala Nxumalo struggles? Or do I simply give sympathy but carry on in my corner? Or do I reach out and say, how do I work with you? When people say to me, who is Tambo? There is no way I can describe Tambo and not mention Luthuli. There is no way you can describe Mandela and not mention Sisulu and Tambo and the Kathradas. And it is the very same essence of that I'm saying. Do we really ever stop and think about how we are stronger as a collective? In our difference, in our diversity. Diversity doesn't stop if you work together. It doesn't mean, therefore, the diversity disappears. So for me, I think that's my last contribution for tonight, because I think I will still carry on to think about this, and I'm enriched by some of the comments that came from my fellow foundation leaders, because I think every day as you push the barriers, you learn more, you listen to young people, you learn more, you listen to and I don't think foundations are only for young people also. It covers a whole lot of other people, and we never even talk about the other sectors that really can be touched by some of the work that we do. So with that, I really want to thank and appreciate the kind of insights that are gathered here tonight.
I think first and foremost, this discussion on its own was okay, because the foundations got to see what similarities and commonalities that they have. But I think the mistake that anyone can make is to say they speak on behalf of young people as a whole. Because my question here now would be, who are those young people that have the questions? And when you say young people, are you speaking on behalf of Busi? Because I am a young person, but I might not be aligned to what Nkululeko is saying. He says shut down foundations. I'm like, hell no. Because I understand what a foundation is and what the purpose of a foundation is. So I think let's not make that mistake of saying that we are speaking on behalf of young people in South Africa, because I'm not in his percentage, and neither is he in my percentage. So we can say what we are saying, but let us just be mindful that there are a lot of young people out there, and maybe engaging with young people from different sectors or different provinces is what foundations need to start doing. But there's that. Thanks.
Nkululeko, fees must fall is not finished. And I think it's a mistake to have said that it is finished, because it still is a big issue in education. But more importantly, I think when we were talking about young people, it's been our engagement, and what we've tried to do is to create platforms with student organize students, not necessarily formal student organizations on campuses, but engaging with students who would invite us to be part of different discussions. And I think that is where so much of this has come out. And I think for us as a center, the important thing is exactly what you spoke about, is listening. Now, how we move forward on that, of course, is the million-dollar question. And I think that part of the discussion here this evening has been provoking in that way. And Linda, when you said you're struggling for funds, well, we're 2 months away from no funding, so it's an ouch question. And I think we have particular mandates that we want to fulfill with regards to the person upon in whom our center is named. But I think there are, Linda, what you were saying, these possibilities to look at common initiatives like anti-racism or racism. Because no matter which foundation we are here, that is something that's common. We focus on the Mzala's national question, but that's also about race and class and gender. So I think there can be projects where we can share resources.
Thank you. I think what I need to say is what this center does. What we have found is that the young people have got a lot to say, but there is no platform. And I think that's the objective of the center. To create that platform, to be a voice for young people. What Mzala used to do, he used to use his pen and paper to create a dialogue and debate. And when he finds that there is nobody responding, he will respond and remain controversial until somebody talks. So the center also encourages you, Nkululeko, that as young people, do not just talk, but put everything down in paper so that others can read and engage on those issues. Now this platform is an initiative to ensure that everybody else, even foundations, communicate. Each one of them, as foundations and centers, represent a certain aspect about those leaders. Mzala talks about writing and voicing your opinion. Nelson Mandela is something else. O.R. Tambo also. Appreciate them for what they represent as individuals. And those are the things that the foundations and the centers want to take forward. The principles about what they represent. It's not just the name. Don't look at the name, but what the person represents. Thank you.
I think I have a number of points to bring about. But the first one that I found to be completely offensive, and I want to apologize to all the elders here, was the "you guys" comment. I was just like, you can't. And I don't think a blanket approach of saying something must come to a complete stop and an end means it's, and rendering it completely useless because you haven't seen the effects of it in your particular life. But you should ask everybody else around you and other people in other places and how these particular foundations have changed other people's lives. Because just because it doesn't work for you doesn't mean it doesn't work for others, yeah? Past that, the reason why you try to have a particular foundation and you're able to get funds and help to change people's lives. One, the foundations were built on the particular person and the characteristics that they had, the values and so on, and they'd like that to continue because they saw the kind of influence that all these comrades had in people's lives. They were successful in their movement. And so when you think about the movement of the youth right now, you have not succeeded in the movements that you've made, perhaps by following and being inspired by the very characteristics that they had, and what they were able to do and how they're able to accomplish. With the sunset clauses, the youth can come about bringing in and contributing positively by giving ways in which we can actually move forward with rising clauses. Because freedom for some is freedom for none. We still have so many mental constraints, some of which in a society that you were born into, but they help to create for you. And now here you are able to say these things. So we can't make a mockery also of those people that used to exist, because to some extent, and forget them, because they're important in how we continue forward, right? And I think that, you know, if you were to help them to give ideas on the current social struggles that our people have, that they're not in tune with because they lived in a different time, they can use those very characteristics that the foundations were built upon and apply them now, so that they can be useful for you. And then you can actually see those effects in your life. Yeah?
I think one thing elders also need to take into consideration at times is that now you're making it difficult for me. okay, but I'm speaking about the panel and also the broader society in that age bracket. I think sometimes the mistake that gets made is that you want to explain certain things to us where we understand but we disagree. So I think instead of trying to maybe make us understand, you should convince us with better arguments. So I think that's that. And actually, I just wanted to make probably a closing comment, and I liked it when Black Panther was brought up. And I think the very interesting thing about Black Panther and its success is that Black Panther as a character is very underwhelming. He has no charisma, he's not that clever, he's not that strong. Killmonger was as strong as him, essentially, if you watch the movie. But the thing about Black Panther that made it resonate with so many people is that Wakanda, so the principle behind it, and the principle of a people that is completely free, that don't have the after effects of colonialism, and had that self-determination. So I think moving forward, that if we're looking at the Black Panther approach, we're also saying, okay, let's not focus so much on Black Panther as a character, because it's not about him, it's about Wakanda, it's about Africa, you know. So I think maybe just take that into consideration. Thank you.
No, great point to raise, because another one, I just want to plant the seed, is a point that was raised about foundations behaving or having become brands. You know, we will see now with July 18th, with Madiba's birthday, people will be out doing, and I say so-called good. Well, it's good for the day, but equally, as we were deliberating yesterday over dinner with Derek, then comes in the selfie mentality. So, we'll see social media pictures and all of that, but I think it's exploiting the very fact that the foundations are more brands now, and we all know what happens to brands, isn't it? They are fashionable at one point, and then they become less fashionable as time evolves. Just a thought there. But let's hear from the Mandela Foundation. Your thoughts thus far, what the young people are saying, and what's been deliberated.
Well, I think the point about listening is very well taken, and I want to link it to the question of brand, because it is critical. The Mandela brand, whether there is a foundation or not, is globally huge. And that means money. And that's why the Nelson Mandela Foundation doesn't struggle for funding in the way that other foundations does. And the question becomes, and that's what we're listening to, the critique, and it's not only from young people, is around how we spend money. So Mandela Day, arguably it's been turned into a do-gooding campaign. And the question becomes, what are you achieving in terms of changing systems of power and privilege? And the critique started long ago, when Madiba was still driving things at the foundation. So Madiba raises money from wealthy corporations to build schools. You go and look at those schools today. A lot of them are in disrepair. And you have to ask, what did we achieve with that? We didn't address the systemic problem by building another school. And now our president is giving us half his salary. And the question becomes, so what are you going to do with that money? Are you going to go and upgrade a few early childhood development centers? What is that going to achieve? We've been approached by the Department of Basic Education. Huge money, international money, to address the problem of toilets in our schools. And the temptation to say, right, we're going to go and fix these. We're going to build proper toilets in 5,000 schools. Well, if you go back in 10 years' time, those toilets will be a problem because you haven't changed the systems that are supposed to maintain those toilets. And
sometimes if you go back in 2 years' time.
Exactly. And I think that critique has been a strong one, it's a valid one, it's one we're listening to very closely. And clearly we have to transform the way we work, and we need to be contributing to a fundamental transformation of our society.
Can I just share something? Because it came, the thought came earlier when people were talking, and I think it's a project we all need to watch closely, and we might usefully contribute. You know, the Constitution Hill is about to build the Constitutional Museum, which they shortened too much. And part of the approach is to call for all of us that have pieces of contributions by various people and entities in the country that contributed towards the Constitution to also contribute towards that museum. So at the end of the day, if it's built well and it's done well, it would be a museum that tells the story of the weaving of different people, different roles and contributions they played in handing us over this Constitution. So the understanding would be far much deeper than if the Ramaphosa and Rolf Meyer foundations came together and said, we were the face of that process, we're going to have a constitutional museum. Or Albie Sachs vociferously said, OR started the fundamental building blocks of the Constitution, so we are going to do it. And I think those are some of the lessons I would like us to look at, ponder, participate in, and learn, because they may lead us to other things that deal with other things better and differently without it being owned by one entity. But us, and maybe then, as you said, it's part of the system that may change the psyche of society. When I see myself reflected in something, I may respect it better. I don't know. But I think there are some opportunities in that too.
Thank you. Thank you, Speaker. My name is Brian, and again, I want to say that I'm not the best person to say what I'm going to say now, because I work for an institution that is government funded. I work for the Literary Museum. But what I need to say is that I hear what Ven is saying. I also hear my sister, what she said. And the thing that has come out for me here, and I speak about foundation, is about fundraising. It's about money. It's about endowment. But when Ven said, or even speaking about systems, when Ven speaks about systems, and I'm saying, and you are saying that it's how you spend the money. The thing is, and I've tried to write it down, what I'm going to say now. The one thing that actually is exceptional about South Africa from my point of view is basically the point of where we think that money is the answer to all our problems, our situations. And that's the biggest misnomer that's going on in the country. if there is one thing that these leaders we speak of, and I hear my sister, because like I wanted to stand up and clap when you spoke, but then I had to contain myself because the points that you're raising were so very much touching to me. The leaders that we represent, that we work for, the one thing that they exemplify is what can be achieved without money. They do not invest in money to get things done. They actually basically invested in themselves as persons. Now, I remember watching a documentary on Chief Lutuli, and then where Umamo Fatima Mie, then she was giving her recollections about Chief Lutuli, and she said that Lutuli, for her, represented a persona, a new African persona, in as far as basically what a leader should be and what a society should be like and all of that. Now, these leaders we are about, they were about collective effort. They were about volunteerism. They were about wanting to change society. They were about basically wanting to make better out of, making something better out of nothing. Now, sometimes as we move forward, we miss that point. And we get caught up in the brands. We get caught up in the competition of brands. We get caught up in terms of who actually was the bigger leader. We also get caught up in the politics of the current politics. And they also basically misdirect what actually we should be doing. I also like what the gentleman from the Dennis Haley said. You know, as he was talking in terms of what they are doing as the Haley Center, and what went into my mind is that why you are doing that and how you are doing it is not much also about what Father Haley did, but it was also basically you were responding to a situation where you found yourself, where you're located. And much of the soup kitchen and all of that, you will not be doing that if actually your setting was in a different area. It's the same situation we find ourselves as a Lutuli Museum. You see, our government established museums in areas that basically are not urban centers. We are located basically in places which are rural, that are township, that don't even have a concept what a museum is. So we are also facing the same battles as these institutions. We are asked the same question that are being asked foundations. What relevance do we have in as far as basically where, now we can't even do pure museum work because expectations of the people out there where we are located, they move from premise of their basic needs and then they transcend to all the other levels. So we find ourselves now being more responsive to those, doing what you spoke about. Sorry, I didn't catch your name.
Douglas is my first name, Douglas Irvin.
Oh, yes, I didn't. Well, basically, we find ourselves doing the same thing that we are doing. And then people start to question whether then are we a museum or are we a center or are we doing social work and all of that. But we can't divorce ourselves from that. And that's why I'm saying that the minute we actually sit down, because I like the idea that this is a seed that we are planting here. And I'm hoping that the center, the Mzala Nxumalo Center doesn't stop here, that we have a second round of this. Because this meeting needs to happen. Because you see, all of us are scattered all over. We are doing what we are doing, and we don't reach that scale, that way you can see that there is movement, that something significant is happening. Because we are doing things in our little pockets, we are not knowing we are duplicating, and we don't know who's doing what, who's not. But for me, and I hear, I'm bad with names, Oba, for what you are saying. You see foundations become important, because if there is one thing that is very notable about human beings, is the power to forget. Now, it's not about forgetting where we come from and all of that, but it's basically just to forget how things were done then, because solutions that we are seeking now were found before and before. And while you find ourselves in South Africa now, we are almost like in circles. And then if we were to give ourselves time, if foundations also were going to do that and give us great platforms where actually then we talk about how these leaders did what they did and how they reach solutions and how they dealt with their environment and all of that, then we'll not have to go back and to think of a new solution, because there's nothing new currently in terms of dealing with situations. It was just basically a cycle. So that's why I'm saying that foundations become important in that respect, because if they were not there, really we will forget the works of Ubabaheli, Bob Katrada, Bob Tuli, Bob Mandela and all of that. That is where they become also more important, because they remind, because if these leaders come through a museum, because we as museums, because we work with government, basically our message basically is questioned from the start. We come with package because we are funded by government, but foundations can be independent, can be seen and can be understood as independent. So that's where I think foundations lie actually. Then I know that I went at length, program director, but I just wanted to say what I wanted to say because I felt it was important. And I'm wishing that this session doesn't actually stop here today, but then also if this session can also begin to talk about foundations in relation to museums. Because I know that basically Van yourselves and the other, I mean, we are also, then I know Mr. Tuli from the foundation, he did say that actually they are also, as a foundation, working with the museum and all of that, because that also becomes important. And then it will then come back to what Usis is saying, where we start to begin to connect the dots and do the links. And that's when we can see basically economies of scale type of movement in our work. Thank you, Chair.
Let me just come in. I thought because we had facilitated this listen more, because it's very useful. The one point that I think I would love to emphasize, is to echo basically what has been said, but drive it home. I think what we are taking here, to me, the most important point is that we're planting a seed. I think when we went to the Nelson Mandela Foundation with Derek at one point, it was very clear that we need to talk. Because I think it's then, I don't know if Van Harris remembers, it's then that we realize we have more than 50 foundations. And of course, the key question is, what do we do to ensure that there is coordination in the work that we do? Because we don't want to invent the wheel, to echo what Brian was just saying just now. To imagine that we are inventing the wheel when something had been done before. We need to learn from one another because we will have more impact. That's the one thing. The one other thing that I thought I need to emphasize, as a center, I think I like what Umama Umpo was saying. We are there to listen. The center is there because we want to engage with young people throughout the country. But we wouldn't want to do that in isolation from other foundations. Because there exactly is where we're going to make mistakes of assuming that the concept and the approach we're adopting is new, when in fact we may be learning more from the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation. But our job is to listen. Is to listen primarily because I think it can be captured better than the following. Mzala was the youth to OR Tambo. He passed away at the age of 35, if you come to think of it, in 1991. So he was the youth. He's a younger generation. He goes through the PCM. Perhaps much more importantly, shares the date of birth with OR Tambo, the 27th of October. They share the date of birth. But the key point, again, there is to encourage dialogue, to talk, to listen, to engage. The point that Tumamupo was making, I like it because academics, I'm currently trying to review the literature around this time. Academics talking about the approaches to the struggle, particularly in the late 70s, early 80s, are not aware that Mzala is debating himself. They quote Migwe as if Migwe is somebody else, Mzala is somebody else. They don't realize that the very key moving sort of debates around these issues that are published. About Mzala, he writes a paper, nobody responds, he writes another paper until they defend Mzala from this unknown Migwe and stuff like that. But ultimately, academics in universities, I like ourselves, we are ignorant that there are these people out there who are writing as, you know, organic intellectuals. It goes back to the point that I thought I wanted to touch earlier on. I'm not so sure, probably I'm coming from a different world. The people who have inspired me are people who never had formal education. I've actually found a great deal of enrichment, what we would call organic intellectuals. The one, hopefully one day, they will actually think of looking at his work because he has footprints all over. In Tanzania, is Johannes Pugula, past 4. He never saw the inside of a classroom. But I could discuss anything with Pugula if I was disciplined on globalization, as an example. The one person who disciplined me from a struggle perspective, from traveling all over the place, from being able to talk Swahili and a range of languages, was passed for Pugula. So it does say there is a need to listen, engage, and try to understand the other perspective, because we'll be able to move this society forward if we're not going to adopt an elitist approach. Because the danger of saying formal education means you are clever. Formal education means you have an opportunity that is denied to the youths that are demanding that fees must fall. So as a center, we will actually try and do that. But I think the seed is to listen to other foundations who are the youngest, in this case. I said even the CEO is young when he's in a company of his bigger brothers. We're the youngest here. We want to learn from you so that we can then question. But I think the one thing, distinct thing about the center is that we believe that the left agenda ought to be mainstreamed. Mzala represented that. When we talk about the national question, we're not removing racism. We see that it persists. But we also point out that apartheid itself was an instrument of exploitation. It was a means to render the majority of our people in this country vulnerable to exploitation. It has a class content in it. So therefore, even your interventions by the apartheid state, they cast the broad-based economic empowerment, but they had their own economic empowerment through a number of these SOEs that were now plundering. They were created primarily because they were looking for the minority. So it's to mainstream those issues and say, how then, if at a particular point it worked for the minority, how do we make use of the resources that are there to advance the interest of the majority? And the center represents that kind of thing. So I'm taking, and I want to say to you, Brian, we're not stopping today. We'll be knocking at the big brother and big sister sort of foundations to say, let's talk more. Let's find ways of ensuring that we make more impact. But with one guidance, we listen. We are willing to listen. Tambo's listened. In fact, by the time Mzala passed on, he was supposed to write OR's biography himself. He would have gone to the United States to do that. So, because he appreciated the potential that is there, we want to appreciate the potential from the next generation of leaders who are going to take us forward. From 2018, in 2068, it won't be us. It will be the Kululegos and others. Kululego shouldn't be afraid to say the wrong things. Say the wrong things as much as possible. I think for those of us who are older, this is my former lecturer, by the way. We said wrong things to him, and then he encouraged me to say wrong, to encourage young students to say the wrong things. The ones who got the marks from me are the ones who disagreed with me. So if you disagree, we move forward. Dialectical materialism is about that. Even the idea of walking out of here. Look at your body, look at that gentleman walking. One goes front, one goes back, one goes front. There is a friction. And the friction will move us forward. Thank you.
Well said, Mr. Stoll. Thank you so much. Yes, before we get our conclusions and thoughts, and I would like to go around just briefly, 3 minutes each foundation, just to give your final thoughts. The gentleman said something interesting about museums, that they are often built, if not most of them, in townships, in areas where there's socio-economic challenges surrounding the foundations, and you end up doing those things, and people mistake you to be a charitable organization. Maybe in part, the youth have a point by suggesting that foundations should become museums, because there you are finding yourself doing the things that, addressing the challenges that are faced by the communities within which these museums are built. But on a more positive note, I also like the point you ended on, that there should be collaborations perhaps with the museums as well, and the foundation. So for me overall, just taking in from the different points of views that were raised here, surely there's a greater need, and I think there's consensus here, that foundations need to go back and rethink a new way, perhaps, of mobilizing society once again. Because here we're talking about the youth, but the youth is just but one demographic of a broader society. There's other groupings within our societies. Who knows how they feel about the work that's done by the foundation. So we'll go around and just 3 minutes thoughts, perhaps. We start with the Mandela Foundation, closest to me.
I don't have any closing thoughts, really. I've been listening carefully, and I think that I do think there's a kernel of truth in that suggestion that foundations should close down. Because if you look at where these foundations came from, so many of of us emerged from a sense that our society is not functioning well. Our democracy is not delivering to the great majority of our people. We need to do something. We saw a flowering of foundations in the immediate post-Polokwane period, for example. And in a well-functioning society, there wouldn't be so many foundations, all trying to fix society and make a difference. We need our institutions of the state to work effectively, and other institutions of society, community-based organizations. So many of these NGOs, these foundations, suck up resources that could be used by community-based organizations working on the ground. And I think we need to be reflecting on all of these issues moving forward. Thank you.
I think there is truth in what the youth, or at least a section of the youth, yeah, and what Nkululeko is saying, in that perhaps we need to listen to them a bit more, and so we need to build those bridges and communicate more. That I think I do accept. I do not believe that the foundations need to close. I think that different organizations in society play different roles, and all of them are necessary. Whether or not the resources available are sufficient to sustain all of them is another question. Okay, and yes, there is concern about that, but I think that these organizations, the foundations, and other NGOs, community-based organizations, they do important work out there, and even if it's to work towards ensuring that our systems, governmental systems, work and we hold our leaders accountable, etc., etc. We have a role to play in society, and I think foundations shouldn't close. Perhaps we need to find a better way of working. We need to find a better way of coordinating our efforts, but I certainly don't think that they should close.
For me, I think it's the linkages between foundations and social justice institutions located within civil society. If we get that connections right, I think we will begin to scale up impact. Foundations on their own can do, I think, just a limited amount. I'm not going to whether they should or shouldn't close. They will derive that from their own mandates. I do think there is a necessity for foundations to be convened, and I think there have been efforts around that. Because there is a lot that we can do in relation to collaboration, information sharing, but continuously having a joint assessment of what is it that this country needs us to do, and figuring out what is it that we can do individually and collectively.
I'm probably the only person here who unequivocally doesn't mind being called an elder. Because I have a memory from 1960 or thereabouts of a huge meeting in the Pietermaritzburg City Hall. I was a student at the time, where we all sang, this huge multiracial audience, Somlandela Lutuli. And that is something in a sense that one has done over the intervening 60 years. A comment simply here is that what occurred to me in relation to the political figures represented by the foundations is that, of course, the foundations, the important thing about the foundations is that they are not political parties as such, and that therefore they are much freer to look at underlying principles, and the underlying principles of the names that they bear, and that they are therefore also free to speak the truth and to stimulate action in a way that more overt political movements can't necessarily do.
Is it back?
I really don't have much to say except to thank Mzala for leading this discussion and ensuring that we are here today. I think we shouldn't allow people from Devon to organize. It's cold, it's the wrong night, you know, and we should have assisted just in the organizing. Yeah, you know, I don't understand, but thank you so much. And I love the diversity. I think the listening is important, and when there's diversity, it's not wrong. It's just a different viewpoint from another angle.
I need to actually say I would have loved to give it to Derek. Would you like to do it, Derek? Yeah, I would like to actually thank all the foundations. I know. I was thinking, in fact, I'm a football fan myself. Apart, of course, he says he liked karate. By the way, Mzala had a black belt. He said to like Kung Fu. Mzala had a black belt. So you need to start having a new hero, by the way, but not do it. Because there you are. You know him as an MK and the organic intellectuals. He had a black belt as well. The one point that I would like to say is to express our appreciation. I'm a soccer fan. I was sitting saying there, geez, I mean, work responsibility is something else. I would have loved to sit and watch what's going on with the opening of the World Cup today. But we really appreciate that you are here. And then, of course, the most important thing for us is that we need to learn from you. We need to start dialoguing. But it's clear from where we're seated. The points that were expressed by young people is very clear. I agree entirely. We are not political. That is why we are saying we are reaching out. Even the one, I'm not saying we are apolitical, by the way. We have a left agenda. In our case, we are clear, but we are not political parties. I agree with you. But that is why we're able to convene a forum of all the left-orientated organizations in this country. I understand the last one was in 1995, and from what I'm hearing, it was a disaster. But we were able to have that engagement last year because we're saying, if for us, as Mzala said, we are unapologetically left and we want that agenda put there, but we're open to collaborating with everybody else. That's who Mzala was. A person who's actually working within the space who can appreciate and be able to identify who of our peers is doing what at any given time. So it's a challenge that we need to talk about. How do we do that? But much more importantly, I think I like the point that you made. We need to reach out to the other organizations because quite clearly the kinds of questions we ask are questions that won't really require foundations only, but will require your civil society organizations so that we can encourage active citizenry, people to ask questions. These leaders are a product of a consciousness to say we need to move society forward. If something is not wrong after 2007 at Polokwane, and perhaps something is still not wrong after, is not correct after Nasrec, I'm not so sure. And if there are killings that are going on, at some point we need to start coordinating with the civil society organizations to put pressure on political parties. The point I was making, I'm not apologetic about it. The plundering and the killings that are going on have nothing to do with service delivery to the masses of our people. It has more to do with the plundering and the accumulation by the set of thieves who are not representing the values that were shared by these leaders. And we need at some point to be able to say that, call a spade a spade. A thief, a kleptocracy. And I think it's one of these things that we need to, whether it's called state capture or anything, these are the issues that we need to be putting on the agenda so that people can make a distinction between who they vote for. At times, for those of us who were there before, we are saying, yes, we have a particular membership. But that membership doesn't mean that I need to go and vote if we go to vote and vote for a thief. Because the kinds of lists we are going to see are the lists of people, perhaps program director, who from time to time would say to you, I'm in a league of the 1 millions or in a league of the 2 millions. And you say, but Chief, how did you do that? They say, no, we got deployed in our branch so that you then get deployed elsewhere. And then say, are you aware that the very resources that are millions in your own bank account are the resources that should be doing better with the toilets, they should be doing better with the services we need. And we need to have more dialogue. And it can't be limited to the foundations, but to the civil society organizations for active citizenry to happen in this country. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you so much, Mr. Sithole, and of course the Mzala Nxumalo Center for inviting me. First of all, it's been an engaging and sobering engagement on this cold Thursday. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Thanks to the foundations, and have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.